At 12:17 in the morning, Ethan Callahan found his fiancée pushing Naomi Brooks toward the service entrance, while a diamond bracelet glittered between Victoria's fingers. Naomi's canvas bag lay open across the marble floor, spilling a paperback novel, folded clothes, a water bottle, and a framed photograph beneath a security camera that had been twisted toward the wall. Victoria released Naomi's arm the moment Ethan stepped into the hallway, then placed the bracelet on the console table as though it had been there all along. Before he could ask a question, she said, "I found it in her coat," and she was trying to leave before anyone woke up. Naomi stood several feet away with anger tightening her face, a sharper emotion than Ethan had ever seen from the woman who had worked inside his home for nearly 3 years. She denied stealing the bracelet but refused to explain why Victoria had ordered her out through the back entrance. Ethan asked whether someone else was involved, and Naomi glanced toward the upper hallway before answering that another employee could lose his job if she spoke without proof. Victoria called the answer manipulative, yet Ethan noticed that she seemed more concerned about what Naomi might reveal than about recovering the jewelry already resting safely on the table. He picked up Naomi's coat and examined the pocket where Victoria claimed to have found the bracelet. The fabric showed no weight mark, and the pocket contained no loose fibers, disturbed by a heavy piece of jewelry. When he asked who had touched the coat, Victoria said only Naomi had access to it, then added, "Unless you believe I planted my own grandmother's bracelet." Ethan had not accused her, but the defense arrived so quickly that he stored it beside the camera, turned away from the scene. Harold Benson, the estate's longtime security director, reached the hallway within minutes. He confirmed that the camera had been physically rotated and that 36 minutes of upstairs footage were missing from the recording archive. Someone had used a temporary administrator code to disable storage, then erased the access log before midnight. Naomi had no authorization for the security office, while Victoria's foundation staff regularly used the estate during preparations for charitable events. Ethan instructed Harold to secure every device and told Victoria that no employee would be dismissed before the investigation produced facts. Victoria stared at him as though the greater betrayal was his refusal to accept her word immediately. Naomi asked to wait in the library instead of the staff quarters, explaining that several employees had already seen her belongings searched. Ethan agreed, disturbed by the fact that she no longer felt safe in a house where he had believed fair procedures protected everyone equally. As Naomi gathered her possessions, a small notebook slid beneath the console table. Ethan reached it before Victoria, whose hand moved toward the cover with surprising urgency. The notebook contained household maintenance reminders, medication schedules for older staff members, and shipment numbers connected to the Callahan Family Foundation. Several recent pages had been torn close to the binding, leaving narrow fragments marked with blue ink. Victoria recovered first. "That notebook has nothing to do with stolen jewelry." Naomi's expression changed, not into guilt but fear. She asked Ethan to return it, saying the missing pages contained information she should have reported weeks earlier. When he asked why she had waited, Naomi looked toward Victoria and said, "Because people do not risk the same amount when they accuse someone powerful." Victoria stepped between them, insisting Naomi was inventing a distraction after being caught. Ethan looked at the bracelet, the missing footage, and the damaged notebook, recognizing that the theft accusation had been designed to produce a quick judgment before anyone examined another question. He gave the notebook back to Naomi but told her she would need to explain every entry before morning. "You think she is telling the truth?" Victoria asked. "I think someone turned a camera away, erased 36 minutes, and tried to remove her before sunrise," Ethan replied. "That is enough to keep asking questions." Victoria's composure slipped for a moment, revealing something closer to panic than outrage. Naomi closed the notebook against her chest and followed Harold toward the library, while Ethan remained beside the bracelet his fiancée claimed had been stolen. For the first time since their engagement, he wondered whether the jewelry had ever gone missing at all. Ethan questioned Naomi inside his home office, while Harold brought in an outside security technician to preserve the camera system. Naomi kept the notebook on her lap and admitted that she had removed the missing pages herself 2 days earlier, an answer that initially deepened Ethan's suspicion. She explained that the pages recorded delivery numbers from boxes sent through the Callahan Family Foundation, including laptops, tablets, medical equipment, and school supplies supposedly bound for community programs across the state. Naomi began noticing duplicate serial numbers 4 months earlier, while signing for a shipment during Victoria's absence. The same computers appeared in separate donation reports weeks apart, although neither report described returned equipment. When Naomi asked Marcus Bell, the foundation's operations manager, whether the records contained an error, he warned her that inventory matters belonged to senior staff, and later searched the shared employee office without explanation. She had photographed several pages before tearing them from the notebook and storing them in an online account. Her caution came from experience rather than foresight. Naomi's younger brother had once reported payroll fraud at a hotel, only to lose his job while the manager remained employed for another year. Since then, she had promised herself that she would never accuse someone with greater power unless the evidence could survive the retaliation that followed. "You suspected property was being stolen from my mother's foundation and said nothing," Ethan said. "I suspected the records were wrong," Naomi replied. "I did not know why, and I was afraid of what a wrong accusation would cost." The admission weakened any image of perfect courage, but it also sounded more human than the innocence Victoria expected Ethan to dismiss. Naomi had delayed because her wages helped pay Julian's college tuition, and because losing a job inside a wealthy household could follow an employee far beyond one address. She accepted that her silence might carry consequences, though she refused to let Victoria use that failure as proof of another crime. Harold returned with the security technician and confirmed that a temporary administrator code had been requested the previous afternoon through an email bearing Harold's name. The message originated from a tablet assigned to Victoria's event planning account. The device was used by Victoria and Marcus during foundation preparations, which placed neither one directly behind the deleted footage but tied the security breach to their work. Ethan asked Harold to preserve the tablet remotely without notifying its users. He then reviewed the delivery numbers from Naomi's photographs and located a storage company that did not appear on any official foundation contract. State records showed the company belonged to Marcus's sister, while its mailing address matched a commercial building owned by Victoria's father. Victoria entered before Ethan could complete a call to the foundation's outside auditor. She had changed from her night clothes into a tailored cream suit, restoring the appearance of control even though dawn had barely touched the windows. She demanded to know why Naomi remained inside the house and accused Ethan of allowing an employee to interfere with their engagement through insinuation. Ethan mentioned that the foundation used an unlisted storage facility but deliberately withheld its location. Victoria immediately answered that the property handled overflow donations during seasonal events. "I did not tell you which property I found," he said. She paused, then claimed Marcus had mentioned several warehouses during planning meetings. Before Ethan could press further, Harold's phone displayed an alert, showing that someone had attempted to erase the tablet remotely from the foundation office. The request required a verification phrase sent to Victoria's company phone less than a minute earlier. Victoria looked down at the device locked in her hand. She said she had approved several notifications without reading them because Marcus often needed access while traveling. Ethan asked why she would approve a deletion request during an investigation involving missing footage. She accused him of twisting an ordinary mistake into evidence because Naomi had already poisoned his judgment. Naomi stood from her chair, anger finally breaking through her restraint. "I did not need to poison anything. You put your bracelet in my coat and expected my job title to finish the story for you." Victoria crossed the room so quickly that Harold moved between them. "You have no proof I touched your coat." Ethan remembered the flash of diamonds in Victoria's hand when he first entered the hallway. He had doubted what he saw because the alternative threatened the future he had planned. "I saw the bracelet before you placed it on the table," he said. Victoria's eyes fixed on him, calculating whether denial could still survive. Then she turned toward Naomi and said, "Ask her why she was planning to meet a reporter." The accusation changed the room. Naomi denied contacting the press, but Victoria produced a printed email arranging a meeting between Naomi and an investigative journalist the following afternoon. Ethan read the message twice. It carried Naomi's name, her personal address, and details from the missing foundation records. Naomi insisted she had never written the email, although the address belonged to her and the language referenced documents only she possessed. Ethan asked her to open the account from his computer, but the password had been changed 3 hours earlier. The recovery number ended with digits Naomi did not recognize, suggesting someone had taken control of the account before creating a message intended to make her look both guilty and disloyal. Victoria said the explanation was absurd. She argued that Naomi had planned to expose the foundation, stolen the bracelet as insurance, then invented a framing story after being discovered. Her version connected every suspicious detail into one clean narrative, which was precisely why Ethan distrusted it. Real events rarely align so perfectly around the guilt of the least powerful person in the room. Harold traced the email login to the estate's guest network and identified the device as a laptop assigned to Marcus. The login occurred during the same period when the security footage disappeared. Marcus did not answer calls, and his access badge showed he had entered the foundation office shortly after midnight, despite telling staff he was homesick. Ethan instructed the outside auditor to begin a formal inventory review, then notified Foundation Counsel that records might have been falsified. Victoria demanded he stop before unverified allegations damaged programs serving thousands of families. Her concerns sounded reasonable until she suggested they dismiss Naomi quietly, replace the missing equipment from private funds, and review the matter after their wedding. "You are asking me to solve a possible crime by hiding it," Ethan said. "I am asking you not to burn down your mother's legacy over spreadsheets you do not understand." The reference to his mother struck exactly where Victoria intended. For years, Ethan had protected the foundation from public controversy because it remained the last institution carrying her values. Victoria knew that fear and had built her argument around it, just as she had built the accusation around Naomi's vulnerability. By late afternoon, the auditor confirmed that more than 600 donated devices had been listed as delivered to schools that never received them. Some institutions did not exist, while legitimate schools had signed receipts later altered to show larger quantities. Payments from a private electronics distributor flowed into the storage company managed by Marcus's sister, then moved into accounts connected to her family. Victoria claimed Marcus must have acted alone. Ethan asked why her father's property appeared on the records and why Marcus had access to her security account. She said her father rented several buildings through intermediaries and that Marcus handled technical details she never reviewed. Her denials remained plausible in isolation, yet together they required Ethan to believe she had unknowingly approved cameras, shipments, storage, and remote deletions connected to the same man. Foundation Counsel advised Ethan not to confront Marcus until police and forensic accountants secured the records. Over the next 2 days, investigators quietly copied servers, reviewed vendor accounts, and placed the storage facility under surveillance. Ethan kept Victoria at the estate, claiming reporters had gathered beyond the gates. In reality, he wanted to watch whom she contacted once her company phone was removed. Victoria resisted more aggressively as the hours passed. She accused Ethan of protecting Naomi because grief had made him vulnerable to anyone associated with his late mother. She reminded him that Naomi had visited Mrs. Callahan at the hospital without his knowledge, suggesting the friendship might have been a calculated attempt to gain influence. Ethan verified those visits through hospital records, but he did not find the dramatic letter or convenient declaration of Naomi's goodness that grief might have wanted. He found ordinary signatures, volunteer logs, and nurses who remembered Naomi reading on Thursday afternoons without accepting payment. The evidence did not prove Naomi incapable of wrongdoing. It proved only that Victoria's portrait of her as a calculating thief ignored years of conduct requiring no audience. On the third evening, police informed Ethan that Marcus had booked a truck large enough to move the remaining inventory from the warehouse before dawn. They planned to intercept him after he entered, when possession of the altered records would strengthen the case. Naomi offered to identify the files remotely from photographs and video, avoiding any need for her to enter an active scene. At 2 in the morning, Harold connected her to an officer's body camera from the estate's secure office. Naomi recognized the red cabinets where original shipment sheets were stored and directed investigators toward a false panel behind the inventory shelves. Officers found altered receipts, duplicate labels, and handwritten percentages divided among Marcus, the distributor, and an account marked VS. Marcus was arrested while attempting to burn a box of financial records behind the building. Under questioning, he claimed Victoria created the scheme and ordered him to frame Naomi after discovering the notebook. Victoria listened to the accusation through Foundation Counsel and laughed with disbelief. "He stole from us, and now he expects everyone to believe I planned it." Ethan placed the ledger before her. The first transfer into the VS account occurred 6 months earlier than the date she claimed to have learned about the missing equipment. Victoria studied the page, then pointed toward a second set of initials. "Ask Marcus who EC is before you decide I am the only person lying." The initials belonged to Ethan. Ethan recognized the account number attached to his initials as a discretionary foundation fund he had approved for emergency programs. The money did not flow into his personal finances, but Marcus had routed proceeds through an account bearing Ethan's authorization before transferring them elsewhere. If investigators viewed only the ledger, the records could suggest Ethan approved the entire operation. Victoria seized upon his uncertainty. She said Marcus had built the scheme around both of them, using her family property and Ethan's signatures to create protection at opposite ends. According to her, she discovered irregularities 4 months earlier and confronted Marcus, who threatened to make Ethan appear responsible if she reported him. She admitted hiding the bracelet and fabricating the email, but claimed she acted to prevent Naomi from going public before Victoria could recover the equipment and protect Ethan. The confession arrived in pieces, each one designed to make the next lie easier to accept. Victoria portrayed herself as frightened, compromised, and wrong in method, but loyal in purpose. Ethan wanted to believe some part of it, because the alternative meant she had treated marriage as access to his wealth, influence, and family name. Foundation Counsel advised him to stop questioning her without attorneys present, but Ethan asked one final thing. "Why did you choose Naomi?" Victoria looked toward the window. "Because Marcus said she had copied the numbers. That is why you needed her gone. It is not why you believed the accusation would work." Her silence lasted long enough to answer. When Victoria finally spoke, she said household employees were always the first suspects when valuables disappeared, as though she were describing a fact of nature rather than a prejudice she deliberately used. Ethan understood then that Naomi had not been selected only because she possessed evidence. Victoria selected her because class, race, and employment status would make the lie efficient. Forensic accountants spent the next week reconstructing the VS account. The money covered mortgage arrears, tax liens, and business debts tied to Victoria's father, whose public wealth depended upon properties already pledged to multiple lenders. The first payment occurred shortly after Victoria discovered Marcus's smaller theft scheme. Rather than expose him, she demanded a share and expanded the operation, promising to replace the inventory after marrying Ethan and gaining access to family assets through their prenuptial agreement. Victoria denied planning the marriage around money and insisted she had loved him. Ethan believed she probably had, in the limited way someone could love another person while also treating him as rescue. That complexity made the betrayal more painful, not less. Police charged Marcus with fraud, theft, obstruction, and evidence tampering. Victoria entered negotiations through her attorneys, but continued denying that she designed Naomi's framing. The claim collapsed when investigators recovered deleted voice messages in which Victoria instructed Marcus to use Naomi's email address and reminded him that people believe a bride before they believe the help. Ethan listened only once. The casual certainty in her voice ended any remaining argument between the woman he loved and the evidence before him. He terminated the engagement, removed Victoria from the foundation, and provided investigators with every record connected to his own approvals. He accepted that his failure to read documents carefully had allowed Marcus to use his name, even though Ethan received no money and knew nothing about the theft. The foundation board suspended him pending review, a consequence his attorneys argued he could avoid through a private settlement. Ethan refused. Avoiding public responsibility would repeat the structure that made the fraud possible. Naomi remained on paid leave until police formally cleared her. When Ethan offered reinstatement with a promotion, she declined before he finished explaining the position. The accusation had exposed how much of her life depended upon remaining useful inside other people's homes, where care could be appreciated without ever becoming authority. She admitted that fear had kept her silent about the shipments, and that protecting Julian's tuition had become an excuse long after she knew something was wrong. "I blamed this house for making me invisible," she said. "Some of that blame belongs here. Some belongs to me." Naomi accepted back pay and a written correction distributed to every employee, but she chose a job at a neighborhood community center where she had volunteered on weekends. The position required her to supervise programs, manage budgets, and risk public failure rather than disappear behind work no one noticed. At the front entrance, Ethan apologized for allowing the accusation to stand even temporarily. "You kept asking questions," Naomi said. "That mattered. It did not prevent the damage." "No, but what you do next may prevent someone else's." She walked down the stone path without turning back, leaving Ethan inside a house that no longer felt protected by silence. The investigation continued for 9 months, long enough for public sympathy to disappear and practical consequences to replace outrage. Marcus pleaded guilty and cooperated against the distributor, while Victoria admitted fraud, evidence tampering, and filing a false accusation in exchange for reduced sentencing and restitution. Her father sold 2 commercial properties, though the sale covered only part of the foundation's losses. Ethan testified before the board and acknowledged signing emergency grants without independent review. He could have described himself as another victim of Marcus and Victoria, but that explanation ignored the authority attached to his signature. The board suspended him from foundation leadership for 1 year, donors withdrew, and 3 education programs closed temporarily, while recovered equipment and funds were redistributed. Callahan Capital remained profitable, yet the scandal encouraged employees to report problems previously buried beneath formal procedures. Ethan discovered managers who manipulated overtime records, discouraged complaints, and treated executive confidence as evidence of correctness. He established an independent advocacy office with power to review disciplinary actions, but he refused to use Naomi's name in speeches or publicity. Her humiliation was not a redemption story he owned. Naomi struggled at the community center in ways the estate had never required. She cared easily for people, but avoided delegating, corrected volunteer mistakes herself, and stayed late until exhaustion made her impatient. When the director offered her leadership of an after-school tutoring expansion, Naomi refused twice, insisting she lacked management experience. Julian challenged her during dinner after learning she had already designed schedules, interviewed volunteers, and rebuilt the budget without accepting the title. "You are doing the job while pretending you are not responsible for it," he said. "That is not humility. It is fear with better manners." Naomi accepted the position and made her first public mistake within 2 months. She promised 80 tutoring spaces before confirming transportation costs, leaving 22 families without the schedule they had expected. Her instinct was to work privately until the numbers improved, but she recognized the same delay that had kept her silent about the foundation shipments. She called every parent, explained the error, and admitted that her planning had failed. Several people complained openly. One family left the program, and a local partner questioned whether she should remain in charge. Naomi reorganized the sessions, recruited college volunteers, and reduced administrative hours to protect classroom time. The program survived, though not without visible damage. Ethan heard about the center's funding shortage through Harold's wife, who volunteered there. He did not arrive with a donation. Instead, the foundation's independent committee sent the center a public application for grants, supporting wage assistance and after-school education. Naomi nearly rejected it because accepting money connected to Ethan threatened the independence she had worked to build. The center's director asked whether the grant carried special conditions or private access. It did not. "Then this is not about him," the director said. "It is about whether you are willing to let discomfort make decisions for 22 families." Naomi submitted the application. The committee approved funding for 5 community centers, including hers, and published the scoring process without donor names attached. Ethan attended no announcement and sent no message, expecting gratitude. Months later, Naomi saw him at a public foundation hearing where former employees described how accusations moved downward through organizations. Ethan supported a policy requiring independent review before suspension or dismissal, along with specific safeguards for retaliation, power imbalances, and evidence controlled by supervisors. A board member warned that the policy could slow urgent decisions. Ethan answered that speed mattered only after the direction had been verified. The sentence carried no polished lesson, and he did not look toward Naomi while saying it. After the hearing, Ethan approached her in the lobby and stopped several feet away. Naomi told him the tutoring program had hired 2 teachers and restored every promised space. He said the committee had ranked the application among the strongest submitted that year. "You read it?" she asked. "A redacted version. Your name was removed." Naomi laughed, surprised by the ease of the moment. Ethan smiled, but did not treat the sound as permission to move closer. The center planned a spring celebration to mark the tutoring program's first year, and Naomi invited him before doubt could convert caution into avoidance. The community center planted a young magnolia tree on the morning of the spring celebration because the children had voted for Naomi's grandmother's favorite flower. Families carried folding chairs into the courtyard, volunteers arranged homemade food beneath simple canopies, and students taped handwritten signs to the brick walls describing the goals they had reached during the year. Naomi opened the program by admitting that the tutoring expansion almost failed because she promised more than the budget could support. She thanked the parents who challenged her, the volunteers who refused to hide the shortage, and the families who returned after disappointment. Naming the mistake did not weaken the celebration. It explained why the program deserved trust. Ethan stood near the back beside Harold and several foundation employees, occupying no reserved seat. He listened while a teenager described recovering unpaid wages for his mother, and a young girl read a story about a house where everyone received the same key. Nothing in the program referred to Ethan, Victoria, or the night Naomi was accused, yet the values being practiced around him made the memory impossible to avoid. After the final performance, children attached a wooden plaque beneath the magnolia tree. It read, "Kindness needs courage when fairness becomes inconvenient." Naomi had chosen the sentence after rejecting versions that sounded gentler but asked less from the people reading them. Ethan waited until lunch began before approaching. He thanked Naomi for the invitation and told her the center felt less like charity than a place where people were expected to participate in their own future. Naomi replied that participation required honest limits, something she had learned after promising what she could not deliver. "I read the final foundation report," she said. "You accepted responsibility for the approvals. My signatures were on the documents. Victoria and Marcus used you. They used the room I left unguarded." Naomi noticed that he no longer searched for the interpretation most likely to preserve his pride. She told him she had forgiven him, though forgiveness had not returned the certainty she once felt inside his home. Ethan accepted the distinction without asking how long trust might take or what he could do to accelerate it. He handed her a copy of the Foundation's new employee protection policy. The document carried no dedication, but its review standards required investigators to consider who controlled the evidence, who benefited from immediate judgment, and whether retaliation could silence a witness before facts emerged. "This would have changed that night," Naomi said. "It may change the next one." A little girl approached carrying a watering can too heavy for her arms. Ethan held one side while Naomi supported the other, and together they poured water around the magnolia's roots. Their hands did not touch, and neither person turned the moment into a promise. When the child ran back toward her friends, Ethan asked whether Naomi regretted leaving the estate. She looked through the center's open doors, where Julian helped parents complete scholarship applications and volunteers prepared books for the afternoon session. "I regret waiting until someone pushed me out before admitting I wanted a different life," she said. "I do not regret where I landed. Then asking you to return would make your future about my mistake." It would. They walked beneath the tree's narrow branches while conversation filled the courtyard. Naomi explained that the center planned to open an employment clinic and would apply for foundation funding through the public process. Ethan offered to send the application link, nothing more. Before leaving, he paused beside the plaque. The lesson no longer belonged solely to Victoria's cruelty or Naomi's restraint. It belonged to every person who had allowed fear, comfort, or authority to replace a harder question. Ethan walked through the gate without asking for recognition, a photograph, or another opportunity to prove himself. Naomi watched him leave, then turned when a volunteer called her name from inside. The magnolia had not bloomed. Its branches remained thin, its roots had been disturbed by planting, and no one could promise how it would survive the next winter. Still, it stood in honest soil, surrounded by people prepared to care for it without demanding immediate proof that their effort would be rewarded. Naomi entered the building and closed the door gently behind her, leaving the tree beneath an open sky.